Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Welcome, welcome, welcome to iMarch for Immigration. This is a nationwide effort for immigration reform. Everybody's in the right place, right? Okay. All right. All right. I'd like to first of all, thank our sponsors and hosts. First of all, New American Economy, Scheef and Stone, the Immigrant Entrepreneur Network, More Than a Refugee, and DFW Global Co-work for hosting this event. And of course, I want to thank all of you for taking the time to support this very important initiative. So I'm Ann Massey-Badmus. I'm partner with the law firm of Scheef and Stone, where I have the honor of helping hardworking immigrant professionals and entrepreneurs achieve their goals to make the United States their home. So we're here today to advocate on behalf of immigrants. As someone who's helped many, many immigrants navigate our very difficult immigration system, and have been in the system for quite some time, I feel like we've reached sort of a crisis level here. I think I hear some agreement. People are seeing that. So now more than ever, we really believe that this is the time for us to fix our broken immigration system. So tonight we're going to talk about why immigration reform is so necessary and what we can do to make it happen. So I'm pleased to moderate our panel discussion and introduce our panelists here today. Okay. So first of all, we have with us Laura Collins. Laura, welcome. Laura is the Deputy Director of Economic Growth at the George W. Bush Institute. Laura previously served as the Director of Immigration Policy at the American Action Forum. Laura has experience in politics, working as a senior research analyst at the Republican National Committee for the 2012 election cycle and in the Texas House of Representatives for the 82nd Legislature. A former practicing attorney, Laura earned a JD from the University of Texas School of Law and a BBA from the University of Oklahoma. Let's welcome Laura. Next, we have Peter Burns. Peter, welcome. Peter is a member of Nokia with over 30 years of leadership and management experience. His professional background includes the U.S. Army Signal Corps, retired with 20 years of service. Peter is originally from Jamaica, right? He's an immigrant from Jamaica, and he's currently a business development and technical tendering lead for Nokia, responsible for network integration and professional services for North America. Peter has a Master of Business Administration from the University of Phoenix, and he completed the Entrepreneurial Development Series with the University of Texas at Dallas. Peter is very actively involved in the community, in particular with his church, and he's affiliated with Junior Achievement, Leadership Frisco Advisory Council, Program Manager for Frisco Young Entrepreneurs Academy, Board Member of the Frisco Chamber of Commerce, Board Member of the Frisco Education Foundation, and Chairman of Mindbender Academy, which is a science, technology, engineering, arts, and math, or STEAM as we call it, camp that encourages students to consider STEAM as a profession. Peter is a recipient of many awards, including the Congressional Veteran Commendation, 2017 Frisco Styles Magazine Person of the Year, 2014 Frisco Chamber Citizen of the Year, and the 2013 Immigrant Spirit Award. Peter and his wife, Dana, live in Frisco and have 3 children and 3 grandchildren. Welcome, Peter. And last but not least, of course, we have Mary Elizabeth, or Liz Cedillo Pereira, is the Director of Dallas Office of Welcoming Communities and Immigrant Affairs, which was just established this year, March 20th, 2017. The Dallas Welcoming Communities Office seeks to be a bridge connecting Dallas's diverse immigrant communities with existing Dallas residents so that the common ground and shared leadership can be realized. A Dallas native, Liz has more than 15 years of experience at the federal, state, and local level on immigration-related matters. Prior to joining the City of Dallas management team, Liz served as the Obama administration's senior advisor at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, where she focused on immigration policy and community engagement to foster relations in communities across the United States. An attorney, advocate, and policy advisor, Liz is dedicated to improving and strengthening our nation's immigration system. Among her numerous awards for commitment to service and excellence in the legal profession, Liz has been conferred with the Distinguished Alumni Award by the SMU Dedman School of Law, the Otley, am I saying that correctly? Okay, Otley Award from the Republic of Mexico and the Mora Award by the Dallas Women's Foundation. Liz is also board certified in Immigration and Nationality Law by the Texas Board of Legal Specialization and graduated from North Dallas High School, the University of Pennsylvania, and Southern Methodist University School of Law. She's married to Oscar Pereira, an aeronautical engineer. Engineering, that's great. And they are blessed with Amanda, Gabriella, and Oscar Samuel. So welcome, Liz, to our panel. Thank you so much. We're very excited to see all of you here today. As I mentioned, we're going to talk about immigration, well, the state of immigration today and what we need to do to help fix the system as it is. So before we get to our panel discussion, I wanted to give you some background and information about why we're here today and what we're seeing today in some respects and what we feel is very necessary for all of us who are here for immigration reform to consider and think about as we try to advocate for our immigrants. Okay, so what I wanted to tell you about was New American Economy. We're here today as part of New American Economy's initiative to bring together, as a part of New American Economy's initiative. So who is New American Economy? It's an organization that brings together more than 500 Republican, Democratic, and independent mayors and business leaders who support immigration reform that will create jobs for Americans today. The coalition consists of, as I mentioned, over 500 members, including mayors of more than 35 people nationwide and business leaders of companies that generate more than $1.5 trillion and employ more than 4 million people across all sectors of the economy, from agriculture to aerospace, hospitality to high tech, and media to manufacturing. So it's a very, so our principles, and this is principles of New American Economy. This is what New American Economy believes are the key to immigration, reforming our immigration system. First of all, we are certainly concerned with making sure that our borders are secure and prevent illegal immigration through tougher enforcement and better use of technology. Develop a simple and secure system for employers to verify employment eligibility and hold businesses that are not compliant accountable for their actions. Increase opportunities for immigrants to enter the United States workforce and for foreign students to stay in the U.S. so that we can attract and keep the best, the brightest, and hardest working who will strengthen our economy. A few more principles. We are also advocating creating a streamlined process where employers can get seasonal and permanent employees when they need it, when Americans aren't able to fill vacant jobs. We also advocate for establishing a path to legal status for undocumented immigrants currently living in the United States, with, of course, requirements for achieving that legal status, such as registering with the federal government, learning English, paying taxes, and following our laws. And last but not least, we want to strengthen federal, state, local, and employer-sponsored programs that offer English language, civics, and educational classes to immigrants. So those are our basic principles, and one of the reasons why we're here today. As an initiative, as I mentioned, is for immigration reform, in particular, what we call iMarch for Immigration Reform, which started yesterday and sort of ends today. It doesn't end today, but it's kicking off our efforts today. So I wanted to let you watch a short video if you haven't seen this already online. It's been throughout social media starting yesterday, and we've had over 4 million so views. So if you haven't seen it, I want you to be sure you get a chance to see it now.
I can tell you that I march because 90% of the DACA recipients are gainfully employed and contribute over $600 million to the local economy.
We are not pulling this nation down, but rather lifting it up.
But that's only being given. Leaders across the country are
So, so as part of iMarch, we want to educate people as to why immigration is important and an actual benefit to our economy, not only to the United States, but also to Texas. So I want to give you some information gathered by New American Economy and one of their reports about the statistics for immigrants in the state of Texas. Not to read all of that, but basically Texas has about 4.7 immigrants, residents, which is about almost 17% of our population in the whole state. Those immigrants in that population generate about $32.1 billion in taxes. They have about $101.2 billion in spending power, and this is just state of Texas that we're talking about, not the United States. Of course, it's much more nationwide. Out of this population, we have nearly over 350,000 immigrants who are entrepreneurs, who are business owners, who are creating jobs. And the statistic that sort of supports that is that over 400 and some thousand employees work at immigrant-owned firms. Taxes and spending power. Well, we feel this is important information for everyone to know. The immigrant household in the state of Texas, again, generates about $133 billion in income. Out of that, there's $32 billion paid in taxes, state and local taxes. So they have a spending power, and that's how we got to that number of $101.2 billion. Even among the undocumented immigrants, we are seeing that it's probably about 1.7 million undocumented immigrants. 90% of that number is of working age, and out of that number, about 141,000 entrepreneurs who are undocumented immigrants. So this particular demographic shows up at about $30.5 billion in household income, paying taxes of about $3.2 billion, and of course having a total spending power of $27.3 billion in Texas. So one of the key initiatives that we're doing today is iMarch for Dreamers. Everybody know who Dreamers are, right? And so we're hearing a lot about them in the news, and so we really want to make sure that we are voicing our concerns that Dreamers are considered by Congress as they should be, and this is one of our biggest initiatives. Why are we doing this? For the state of Texas, we have DACA, or Dreamers, pretty much equivalent, 226,000 DACA-eligible residents. These are young people who pretty much grew up in the United States, grew up in Texas, many of them. 91% of that population is working employed. 7,000 are entrepreneurs as well. Their household income is $3 billion, paying taxes of a little bit over $1 billion, or a little bit under $1 billion, so their total spending power is $2.6 billion. So if this population can no longer continue to work, which is what we know about today, is that as of March, their ability to work for many of them will be lost, and their ability to actually remain in the United States without fear of deportation will be lost. So if this issue is not addressed, you can see there will be economic consequences, not just to them, but to our economy as well. These are people who are employed with businesses. In my own experience as an immigration attorney, we have many employers who are, of course, very much concerned because they are actively employing people who have authorization to work only by means of DACA. And so this could cause a significant upheaval in our system and throughout the U.S., not just in Texas as well. So from an economic standpoint, we think there's some real urgency here for Congress to act. So what are we looking for? What is the policy that we wanted to watch out for? And that's, many of you probably heard about what's going on in Congress right now as far as the spending bill and the extension until December 22nd, at least for now, for something to be done as far as the budget is concerned. And of course, one of the big issues with the spending bill is what will happen to our DACA immigrants. So many are concerned, and New American Economy is really concerned that we have what we call a clean bill, something that does not impose a lot of trade-offs, so that by benefiting DACA, we don't harm others in the system as well as immigration as well. So This is one key area that now is a very good time because we have, about 2 or 3 weeks, not a lot of time really, but it's a good time for us to, if you have called your congressman, if you have called your senators or congressional representatives, if you have done that, call them again. If you haven't done it, call them now. iMarch for Entrepreneurs. This is another area that we believe really needs to be addressed and reformed in our immigration system. And why? One of the reasons is, as I mentioned before, in Texas alone, we employ, immigrant-owned firms employ over 400,000 people. So we have over 350,000 immigrant entrepreneurs generating $9.2 billion in income. And in fact, Fortune 500 companies in Texas were founded either by immigrants or their children, 27.5% of that. So as you can see, immigration still remains a very vital part of our economic system, and we need to make that point known, and that's why one of the reasons why we're here today. STEM workers, science, technology, engineering, and math. This is another area where immigrants are contributing enormously to our economy. 25.6% of STEM workers are immigrants. And again, this is Texas, so we're only focusing on Texas here. Master's students who are foreign nationals here attending our universities, paying tuition at our universities, and gaining knowledge from our universities is 42.7%. That's a huge number, almost half. Almost half are also PhD students as well. So if there's not an avenue for these individuals to lend their talent to us after they've received the education here, then we're pretty much losing out on a big opportunity. And that's one of the reasons why New American Economy feels that this is an area that we need to also focus on in terms of immigration reform. Healthcare, another area that we are seeing really a shortage in terms of American workers, and where we're seeing that some of this need is being filled by foreign nationals. So doctors in our community who were educated abroad are 25% of our doctors were educated outside the U.S. are foreign nationals. 30% of psychiatrists are foreign nationals. Our nurses who are foreign-born are 20%, and health aides are about 20.7%. Again, there's a real challenge here. Statistically, it's undisputed that healthcare workers are very, very necessary, and there's a huge shortage that is actually probably going to worsen in the future. So one way to hopefully address that is by the immigrant workers here who have been educated and willing to work.
Is that Texas data?
This is Texas. So Immigration Policy Watch for Entrepreneurs. Again, we don't have time to go through all these. There's so many things going on, but I just wanted to give you a brief idea. H-1B and work visas. Everyone familiar or heard of H-1B visas? These are usually professional worker visas for people like doctors, engineers, different STEM fields, as well as other fields that are specialized areas of professions. We are seeing, just from overall, currently this year, a real, I would say almost an attack on H-1B visas. And so under the current Buy American, Hire American policy of the current administration, we are seeing just great scrutiny and almost a criticism of the H-1B visa as an area where people are applying for these visas fraudulently, which is not the case. I mean, H-1B visas have been around for a very long time. In most cases, the majority of the cases, they are legitimate needs that are being addressed there. But, you know, that's what we're seeing. We're pretty much getting a lot of scrutiny there. And so there are concerns about how this H-1B policy and other work visa policies will work out. So if Congress doesn't step in, we may see a huge decrease in the numbers of people who are willing to go through this process for those very needed fields that I mentioned, like the STEM fields, that we have a definite need for. H-4EAD rule. This is a rule that was implemented a couple of years from the Obama administration, which allowed spouses of H-1B workers in some instances to be able to get work authorization. So there are probably thousands of them who have already integrated into the work system, have received these EADs, but under the Trump administration currently, that may be phased out. There is concern that they're no longer going to support that rule, or at least withdraw that rule. So this is an area that, again, we're watching and wanting to see if there's any way that we can address this with Congress as well, because, again, these are people who are here working and lending their skills to the U.S. and already involved in the community. The International Entrepreneur Parole Rule, this is another rule that was initiated by the Obama administration and was supposed to go into effect this past July. It was delayed by the Trump administration, and there is a current lawsuit that, at least initially, it looks like it may have been won in terms of requiring the Trump administration to move forward with that rule. This rule would allow a lot of startup companies with immigrant owners, either part owners or full owners, to be able to start businesses and start to generate jobs in the United States. So we're still watching for that and seeing if that rule is actually going to be implemented through the court action. We have the EB-5 Immigrant Entrepreneur Program. If people heard about that, that is where we have investments. This is actually used to be what's called a pilot program, but it's been going on since 1990. So it is a program that's been around quite a while, but it is always typically has to be renewed through Congress, usually through the spending bill. So there's always concern whether or not that's going to continue. But it is considered to be a job generator. And so that's another area that we're watching as well. Finally, there's the proposed RAISE Act. Has anyone heard of that? Okay. So RAISE Act was, I think, I don't know exactly the name of the congressperson that introduced it, but essentially it is what we call Tom Cotton. Okay, that's exactly right. Tom Cotton introduced this as one avenue to pretty much overhaul the current immigration system, a lot of it legal immigration system. So this addresses the employment or business-based immigration where there is the quota system or the point system where people will go through an evaluation of their skills and background to see if they qualify. It's not necessarily a bad thing, except that this particular legislation really, what it does is reduce legal immigration pretty much in half. It also affects family immigration so that it eliminates some categories such as citizens being able to sponsor their parents to get permanent residence. So there are a lot of issues there. It's by no means at a point where it's going to be law, but it's something to look at. And this is one area that if you feel that this is not a benefit to our current system, you might want to raise that with your congressperson or senator. Finally, I just want to briefly talk, because there's a lot of stuff going on, as you can see. But this is the last area, just the general immigration policy watch. We have, and you may have heard in the news about the temporary protected status expirations, or what we call TPS. And temporary protected status is legal status that is afforded by the, usually by the president, pretty much. Usually in cases where someone is from a country that has suffered environmental disaster, such as Haiti having the earthquake many years ago, or strife, political strife, such as Syrians who have a war going on. So if that individual is in the country at a time where the president or the Department of Homeland Security says, okay, we're going to allow you to be here temporarily until conditions improve in your homeland, that is what's called temporary protected status in just basic terms. We have many temporary protected status individuals who have been here for quite some time, and about 300,000 right now are in danger of losing the temporary protected status because it's unlikely, from what we know at this point, that they will be, the program will be extended for certain people. So for example, there are 60,000 Haitians on the temporary protected status, which are set to expire in 2018. So we have other issues like that. There's a refugee policy, which I know we have people who are very involved in the refugee population who could probably speak better about that than I do, but there is a real concern with the refugee policy currently. For example, the administration withdrew from the UN migration policy where there was international cooperation to try to pretty much share the responsibility globally with respect to refugees, and we've withdrawn from that. And then we have the travel ban. I'm just going to say travel ban, and that's all I'm going to say at this point, okay? And then the concern of deportations, which definitely has risen quite a bit. So there's a lot to unpack here. And we're not going to be able to do all that this evening, but I'm very pleased now to turn to our panel, who will kind of help us to address some of these issues and kind of give us their thoughts as well. So, and we also want the opportunity for, or have the opportunity for all of you to ask your questions. If you would like, we can pass the mic to you, but if you prefer, we can also have you text the questions to this number, 503-564-8627, or you can tweet your questions to @ValidChakotay using the hashtag iMarch for immigration. Okay? All right. Thank you. All right. Well, now turning to our panel. Again, I'm so excited to have this wonderful panel with us tonight. So please take advantage of this. Ask questions, because it's going to be great. Okay. All right. So I just really want to get an idea. I want to get a feel for everyone here. I know I've done some introductions, but I want to hear from your own words what your experiences are. But first of all, Liz, if you could kind of tell us about about the Dallas welcoming communities in particular, because that's really exciting to us that Dallas has taken that initiative.
I'm pleased to do that, and thank you, Ann, for the invitation and New American Economy for sponsoring this important event here and nationally. I have the privilege, the honor of being the first director of this office, which is called the Office of Welcoming Communities and Immigrant Affairs at the City of Dallas. Can I see a show of hands of people who know that we have an Office of Welcoming Communities? Oh, wow, okay, that's more than one person. That's good. The word is spreading. But for those of you who didn't raise your hands, I'm really happy to introduce to you what we're trying to accomplish. Can you hear me? Yeah, I'll speak closer. Thank you, sir. And what we're doing at the City of Dallas, really trying to create a bridge between the immigrant and refugee community and the City of Dallas. We know that the immigrant and refugee community is a thriving part of our community, our economy, our culture, our educational facilities, et cetera. And many times there's a block, a barrier between what's going on in the community and what's going on at City Hall. So our council, our mayor, our city manager said, let's break down that wall. Let's understand what the issues are, what the concerns are, and how we can be relevant as a city government in assisting with some of these needs. So for the last 8 months, we have been meeting with leaders like yourselves, asking what are the concerns? What are the issues? How can we work together? There's so many, right, that Ann has just scratched the surface on. But really what's been most impressive to me is the extension of a welcome from our community across the board, of people who want to say, I'm thrilled that this is happening. How do I get involved? How do we work together? How do we move the ball forward together as a community? So I'm happy to be here for that cause, right, to move the ball forward together. I'm happy to take any questions about the office, but generally that's what we're doing, and we're starting a welcoming task force, which meets for the first time next week at the Dallas Downtown Library. Thank you.
All right. Laura, I had not realized that the George W. Bush Presidential Center actually had a policy initiative on immigration, and so I was really impressed with your webpage. So I would recommend all of you to go to that website, and you can tell them what the URL is, and really read what is stated on their website, because it's very impressive. So can you kind of tell me how that came about and some information about that?
Yeah, great. For those of you who don't know, as Ann didn't, the George W. Bush Institute is the think tank arm, the public policy arm of the Presidential Library Museum that's on SMU's campus. And there are a couple of different issue areas we work in, and one of them is mine economic growth. And as part of that initiative, we believe that immigration reform is part of pro-growth economic policy. And so before I got there several years ago, it was an initiative that started as part of 4% growth. How do we accelerate the domestic economy? And we shifted focus a little bit over the last few years, and this past year we spent trying to get back in this conversation, because we do believe that immigrants can help the economy. And we believe that it's smart policy to increase the number of immigrants that we bring in, to focus on skills-based immigration. And so that's the work that we're doing. We want to take a look at some of the products that we produced this year. One of them is, we call the Immigration Handbook, America's Advantage, and it's at bushcenter.org/immigration. We also have a fun little infographic there that covers some popular myths and tries to debunk those, and a little statement of the policies that we believe in. We firmly believe that immigration reform is something that's very important, and particularly when you talk about the DACA fix and trying to get that done this year. If that's something that can get done and we can see some bipartisan cooperation, we think that can be a catalyst to see more immigration reform happen in the next year or so. It's tough with the midterm elections coming up. That's always a difficult issue to get through. But we think that there's an opening there, particularly if they can come together on a DACA fix.
Great, thank you. And Peter, I know about your organization. You have your own business as well as working with Nokia. Is that right? Can you tell us a little bit about that and how that came about?
So I'll take a step back first and talk about I was in the military 20 years and worked my last assignment was to work in a lab where we were testing a lot of different products to come out into the marketplace. And then, of course, I got invited by a company to come to work for them here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And then later, that company got purchased by Nokia. So today, I work for Nokia, and I'm in a kind of a business development role. So I work with a group of sales folks that go out and basically shake the trees, and we figure out how we can help support those customers with solutions and services for them. So it's a business development role, also employing your entrepreneurial skills in a sense, as well as technical skills for those type of solutions for those customers. Hopefully that made sense.
But you also are very active in the community, and for example, could you tell us a little bit about your Youth Entrepreneur Academy?
Yeah, so we have two initiatives that we're focusing on. One of them is focusing on STEM-related stuff because we all know that I'm in the technology business. The technology is going to drive things in the future, and the jobs that our kids are going to compete in, most of those haven't been created yet, and they're going to be created by those students who get exposed to it today. And so our initiatives is to create a kind of a sandbox approach to things, and just throw the kids in the sandbox and say, here's a problem, figure it out. And let them look at it from their perspective, not from yours, because they look at technology different. And so we see that not only come up with good ideas, but they're also building soft skills. They're learning how to work with each other. They're learning how to communicate with each other and how to solve problems. And one of the things that's great for me is that when you look at the kids, they're not worried about what country you're from, or whether you're a male or female or what have you. They're working together to solve problems. And sometimes I wish our leadership can kind of get that, right, and just kind of work together to solve problems. The other initiative that we have is a entrepreneur initiative where we're trying to encourage students to consider becoming a business owner rather than an employer, right? Because there are so many opportunities that they can solve. I mean, if you think about it, large companies, they start out in a lot of cases small, and then eventually they get large. And then large companies doesn't have the capacity to move from one solution to the other in a very fast way. But a small company, a small entrepreneur can do that. And then hopefully they create a solution for that company that becomes a value, and they can sell that solution to that company and go off and start another one. And so that's the mindset that we have with the students. Again, looking at technology as an opportunity, and also think about entrepreneurial opportunities from that also.
Great. So tell us, I'll get back to you, Peter. I'm going to let you take up this question. I know you just talked, but I'd like you to kind of tell us about your experience. I know you originally immigrated from Jamaica, and kind of, tell us a little bit about your experience and how, go ahead, just tell us about your experience.
So I was born in Jamaica, and I came to the United States when I was 12. And our family moved here to New York City, went to school there for roughly about 6 years. So then shortly after my 18th birthday, I joined the military. No idea about, that I wanted to join the military, other than the fact that the recruiter kept calling. My mom wanted her to stop calling. She says, go see what she wants so she can stop calling. And so I did that. And when I went, I got excited about the tanks, driving the tanks and running over trees and doing all kind of crazy stuff. So I said, hey, I want to do that, and which was cool. But when I took the test to get in, she said, my scores were high to get into the technology-related stuff. So that's what I ended up doing, and I'm glad she steered me in that direction, because I've driven a tank before and it's noisy. It's not fun, all right? But anyway, I got into technology in what we call the Signal Corps, and throughout my career, got a chance to get exposed to a bunch of different things and had some great assignments. In fact, I was responsible for rebuilding the country of Bosnia, their network there, because once the war, we stopped them from fighting. I was part of a team that went in there to help them to rebuild the country. And then a bunch of other things that I was able to participate in. So those skills that I learned in my 20 years in the military gave me the opportunity to do what I'm doing today. And with all of the other things, multitasking becomes very easy to me for some reason from that. But my experience has been in the military with all the skills that I've learned, not only from a technical perspective, but also from a soft skills perspective, have allowed me to be able to employ some of those same skills in the community with young people. And so I've been focusing a lot on that, understanding where I came from. I didn't get exposed to those things at an early age. I got exposed to those while I was in the military, so I was in my teens. And so I always wonder, what would I have done if I was exposed to those earlier? And so I've made a commitment to work with our young people as much as I can to try to expose them, open their eyes from where they are, and then just kind of show them the possibility of things that they can accomplish.
Great, thank you. So, Liz, kind of tell us, about your experience with immigration. You've been an immigration attorney for many, many years, and you were with the Department of Homeland Security. So what are your thoughts or your kind of view on immigration and what you've seen over the years?
Sure. And first of all, has anybody seen Hamilton yet? Oh my gosh, yes. About 2 or 3 people. Well, you know the famous line from Hamilton, immigrants, they get the job done. Right here, that's Peter. And my husband, an immigrant, has a similar, different story, of course, but in the technical field of aeronautics and engineering, and came here at 12, and Mom worked in the textile industry, and he thought he was going in the textile industry because that was the next opportunity out of high school, and some teacher grabbed him by the shirt and told him, you're not going that way, and he applied for a scholarship and went to Institute of Technology in New Jersey. So it's those opportunities that really have inspired me, those stories, rather, as an immigration attorney, because I'm 4th generation Texas. So I'm far removed, although Hispanic heritage. We kind of live the immigrant experience being Hispanics in Texas, although we're native Texans. The irony of some of this is that my grandmother only was able to go to formal education to 1st grade because of laws that prevented people from integrating at the time. So people who are born here can relate to that immigrant experience in a way because of the barriers that have existed in their own lives. And those shared struggles, I think, is what draws us together as a community, that we can help one another and lift each other up and work together for the transformation of our lives and in our communities. And that's certainly what drove me as a practicing immigration attorney for many years, was helping. It was fun for me, in a sense, to figure out this convoluted immigration law and find a path for my clients to find a way to normalize their status or overcome an obstacle. I'm recalling right now 2 young kids who came to see me after having received orders to leave the country to South Korea, somewhere they had never been since their infancy. And thinking, well, why didn't you come see me before you took the order to leave? And saying, well, gosh, I'll try, but I'm not going to guarantee that we can do anything. And one of them today is a dentist, and the other one is serving in the U.S. Armed Forces. So I always think where there's a will, there's a way. And I'm not saying that can be done in every situation, but that's what has driven me as an immigration attorney and in my current position, that there's always a way for us to move forward together.
So what do you see as some of the biggest challenges for immigration today?
I think that one of the biggest challenges is this is just a very anecdote-driven conversation. And I think if there were more facts injected, that more people would have a positive view of this conversation, have a positive view of the contributions of immigrants. We hear so often the few bad apple stories, and that sticks out so much more in people's minds than the positive stories. And so we do focus at the Bush Institute on the economic facts and on the positive stories, and we try to mix the two, and we try to find those, the everyday, ordinary immigrants who are contributing to their communities and put that out there because people like the human interest, and it helps to bring it home a little bit for them, but also have the sort of unemotional cold facts, because the facts really tell the story, which is that immigrants are a contributor to the United States, and they always have been, and this nation was built by immigrants and will continue to be. And so I think the biggest difficulty is breaking through and making sure people understand those facts.
Can you give us one of the stories that you might have run across with the George Bush Institute?
Yeah, actually, we have the privilege of having several immigrants on our staff, and one of them is one of my colleagues, who is a young woman whose family fled Afghanistan, and her family has been here for a long time. She was raised in California, but she has a really remarkable story, and her story is featured on our website, and you can go read about it. And she works on advancing women's empowerment in the Middle East and North Africa and in Afghanistan because of her experiences. And counts her mom as the strongest person she knows, because her mom had a very typical story of being an educated, successful woman who had to take a job that was probably not up to her skill set in the United States, but did it to make ends meet. We also feature one of our, if you paid attention at all to some of the news over the last year of President Bush's paintings, you know that he painted the wounded warriors, and one of the warriors that was featured is a man who was undocumented. And he didn't realize he was undocumented until he was a teenager. He's also featured. He ended up being a veteran. There are remarkable people in our communities that we may not know are immigrants. We may not know their status, but you don't know that because they're contributing just like every other American is.
Peter, in your either in your business or in your work, what's your perspective, or what have you kind of seen with respect to immigration? Because Nokia is technology. I'm sure there are many immigrants that are working at these companies, and they probably have experienced the system itself and maybe have talked about it, or kind of what you're hearing about immigration.
In fact, we have many that are worried about some of those different visa, different laws that you've shared up there. And while you were talking, I thought about two things. One was my mom, and I remember her, when she left Jamaica, left us there for a couple of years to come here just so that she can prepare for us to come. And then when we were little, I was 12, so we didn't really understand. All we knew was we're getting on an airplane and we're flying to America. That was it. Didn't really realize it until later on. Then you understood the sacrifice that her and my dad made to get us here, right? And then, of course, the task for us was to make sure we took advantage of it. The second thing that came to mind was sitting in a meeting, solving a problem for a customer, and I remember looking around the room, and every single person around that table was outside of America except for one person, right? The entire team that we had that was working on a solution for this customer were all outside of America. And when so you don't think about any immigration issues until you get a chance to talk to one or two, and then you hear them tell you about their concerns, right? So on one hand, we're solving problems for customers, but on the other hand, they have an issue or something that they need our government to solve for them, for them to continue doing what they're doing. And so it is a challenge, and I don't think there's anyone that, if you're doing any kind of business here in the United States, that won't come across someone that will be impacted by our immigration issues.
All right. So, and if you can answer this, Liz, what are your observations on the impact of immigrants into North Texas? I know I talked about a lot of statistics and things like that, but I guess from the city of Dallas perspective at least, or what are we seeing in terms of the impact of immigration or immigrants in our communities here?
Well, sure, and I think that probably if we go through the room and we count off by fours, 1 in 4 of us would say, I was born in another country. And that would be indicative of what our community looks like here in the Dallas area, that 1 in 4 of all Dallas residents are born in another country, and including my family. We have 4 at home, and my husband's that 4th that was born in another country. So it's common, right? It's not something that, we don't understand immigrate. It's like what Peter's saying, all of these people who get together, professionals on a daily basis and to solve problems, don't really necessarily think that they're from other countries. They're just there to do their work, to do what they're paid to do on a daily basis. But that is that's what fortifies, right, really our economy. We know that 25% of our labor force is foreign-born, and all the stats that you mentioned, Ann, are certainly true. And so when we're doing this at the City of Dallas, we're not looking at it only from a philanthropic or altruistic point of view. We're looking at it from the point of view is that working together, we build our economy. That the mayor likes to say that Dallas is a miracle story, because we really shouldn't be we really shouldn't be one of the largest economies in the nation, because we don't have a real port, but we've made one, right, with the airport. And we have so many international flights. They're so important to people flying in and out, doing business, the ports that we're trying to build up through logistics, et cetera, all the entrepreneurs that exist. As you said, 27% of our Fortune 500 companies were started by an immigrant. So we recognize that immigrants are a fundamental part of our economic equation. And that's the numbers that are really important, I think, as we look at this looming issue that continues to be a sort of a sore. The biggest right now is the DACA situation. But there's others as that are more esoteric that you wouldn't really understand unless you knew somebody who was an entrepreneur who was going through this rule to get their visa to actually grow their business, or if you knew somebody whose wife or husband was on a H-4 and needed that work permit to survive and to thrive here in the community. If you knew somebody who had DACA and it's already expired and now they're outside of the work permission authorization in our country. Unless you know the people who are impacted by these things, then it goes really outside of your awareness. I think that's why the 3 of us and you, or all of us are here today, is because we have a time frame in which to work. And I guess it started today with the extension of the spending bill. What I've heard from many people who've said, if you've called your member, if this is an important issue to you, then call them again, because today starts the clock again, because there's 2 weeks left to do something for people with DACA.
Do we have a question?
All right. Somebody just texted me and said, what else can you do to advocate for the change of laws for immigration when you feel unheard by your senators and your congressmen? What are the other options?
I think it's actually really important to educate your friends and family and neighbors as well, because then it can help amplify the voice. I think so much, and particularly in the area I work in, we do focus on trying to reach policymakers. But if there's not the sentiment in the general public and the general population that these are things that need to happen, and these are good things, and that there needs to be action taken, then policymakers don't have as much incentive to listen. And in addition, I think it's not just focusing on our people in Washington. There is immigration policy made at state and local levels, and it's important to focus on your elected representatives at those levels as well, because they have more of an impact on your day-to-day than what Washington's able to do. And so it's broaden your horizon, broaden what you think of as advocating.
I would just like to ditto what Laura said, is that this office was started by local leaders, right? And local leaders who were feeling the need for reaching out to our local constituencies. And while we can't control everything that's going on, certainly at the federal or state level, there are opportunities for us to work together Our five foci at the Office of Welcoming Communities are leadership and communications, economic opportunity and education, civic engagement, equity and the delivery of services, and there's one other one that's slipping my mind right now, but it'll come to me in a second. And those are issues that we can all work on together, right? Civic engagement. We know that there's 129,000 people who have their green card, legal permanent residents, who qualify, have been here 5 years or more, and qualify for citizenship. Well, why not break down barriers so that people can become citizens sooner than later? Because we know that when people become citizens, there's more economic opportunities. There's a bigger safety net for themselves and their families. They can sponsor, of course, other family members, and, of course, the right to vote comes with citizenship. So that's a giant part of what we're doing at the Welcoming Office, is to work with our collaborators like Catholic Charities, International Rescue Committee, Proyecto Migrante, and others to say, hey, we can open our libraries. We can use these for mega citizenship applications. What's going to stop us? We have this need. Let's all get together and do it. And so we've had our first one, and we had well over 450 people there. And not all of them applicants. Some of them were volunteers. But that shows us there's just so much goodwill in our communities for people to work together. Some, in fact, of the volunteers were DACA recipients, people who don't even qualify for permanent residency, yet helping others become citizens. It's really fortifying our community, bringing us closer together. And those are things that don't require, federal immigration changes. This is stuff that we can do at the local level.
We have another question. Okay, so somebody just asked, why does the immigration process take so long?
That's a great question for Ann, but
It is a great question, What's that? I thought I heard someone say something. Sorry. Honestly. Yeah, that's probably part of that, definitely. Yeah, so I've worked with immigration, and my focus generally has been on the business side, and we hear the same thing, whether it's someone applying for their family member or someone applying through a business process. It actually really does come down to a couple of things. One would be the laws as written, because there is a particular quota system that we already have. It's not a skills-based system, but there is a quota system that allows only a number of immigrants every year into the U.S., and you usually have to have a relationship either with a family member, a qualifying family member, or with a business that already is willing to hire you. You normally just can't come in and say, I'm ready to work. You already have to have that employer, and for many, that's just not an option because you don't have that employer. But those who are able to go through that process, there's a long, for many, particularly if you come from countries that do have a high rate of immigration, such as from India or from the Philippines and a couple, Mexico in some cases, what you will see is that you are put into that line that people hear about, what's the line? That is one of the lines. And so being in that line in itself can put you many, many years, some as many as 20 years or more waiting, whereas some others are very quick. So the system itself, and that's one of the big reasons we think that there needs to be reform to be more fair, and to be able for people of different backgrounds to be able to immigrate as quickly as others, or as slowly as others, hopefully not, but essentially that's one of the, it's just inside the system itself, that is what causes many people to wait many years in line. But even in some cases, just in terms of processing times, that, the administration, it's has to take their time in many cases to do background checks. It's all interwoven with the government system. And there may be some ways to create efficiencies there, but honestly, Liz, you were probably more in the government than I was, but I don't really know, all the ins and outs of why those things take as long as they do. But, there's a lot of immigration going on. So you're kind of waiting in that line, too, to actually go through processing. So that's the other part of it as well. We try to move things along as quickly as possible, but the laws are what they are. And so we have to kind of, we have to work within those.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Yep. All right, somebody asked the question, can you please explain what is happening with unaccompanied minors that are in removal proceedings?
Anybody want to take that? Well, a subset of what we're talking today, certainly the UAC, unaccompanied children who came in without a parent, who are now in removal proceedings. There are many of them, and I don't think that I'm the best person. Is there anybody doing removal work who is representing UACs currently? That's something that I've done in my previous work. If you're in removal proceedings, of course, you have to show up for court. And if you don't show up for court, then that person will be ordered removed. And so when the person shows up for court, they need to have a way to actually answer to the allegations that have been alleged by the government, meaning you entered without documentation for most cases of these children. And when you answer to those allegations, you have to have a defense mechanism for remaining in the United States. Many times people are applying for asylum because they're coming from countries where they feel like they were compelled to come to the United States because they fear for their lives for different reasons, various reasons. Some people are applying for what's called a special immigrant juvenile visa, which has its own set of criteria, meaning that you have to have shown that you were neglected, abused, or abandoned by one or two of your parents, and therefore it would be incumbent upon the country not to send you back. So those are the two, I guess, most immediate remedies that exist for unaccompanied children. And so if people think that they're being let in and they're not, and nothing's happening, no, actually anybody who's coming in with that status of UAC, they're having to go to court and fighting their cases before a judge. That's it in a very general nutshell. I don't have the particulars about how the court backlog is. There's a lot of issues related to how fast the court moves, but that's basically the situation related to UACs. Does anybody here that would want to add anything from Catholic Charities? Or?
That's not an area that I'm not familiar with, but it just goes to show that there are so many areas that need to be addressed. Just in terms of removal court itself, there's long delays for people even to get through that process. So I mean, just based on your experience of what typically has been the bottleneck that you see that's happening in the courts.
There is a bottleneck, and there's well over hundreds of thousands of cases that are in the court system, and I would only imagine that that's going to become even a bigger issue as the number of arrests go up, the number of apprehension for civil immigration proceedings occurs, and more people are put into the system. I only think it's going to be more of a bottleneck as we move forward.
So I think one of the proposals, under the current administration, in terms of and maybe Liz, you can probably explain this to me because I'm not that familiar with the removal process, but my understanding is that they're trying to broaden the scope of removal or expedited removals as opposed to having to actually go through the immigration court system. Have you heard any feedback on that, or was there?
Well, as part of the executive orders from January 27th, there were a number of them. One order specifically dealt with border apprehensions and security. Another one dealt with interior enforcement, and then there was the issue that's the one that was commonly called the travel ban. But the one related to border security and enforcement expanded the idea of expedited removal to include those people who had been here for under 2 years. So people who are under current regulation, expedited removal generally occurs at the port, at the border. But now it'd be more of in the interior and for up to a period of 2 years. Now, I myself am not currently practicing, so I don't know if that if anybody has seen that occur, but it's certainly something that is there by executive order. It's in the language of the executive order.
So we often get questions, for those who are, of course, afraid in terms of what will happen if I am, if I'm here undocumented and I do come across the police, for example, and we talked about the SB4 local legislation that, maybe you can kind of explain a little bit more about the SB4. I think it's on hold right now. Is that correct?
Parts of it have been enjoined.
Enjoined, okay. So if you can talk about that, because a lot of people are concerned about what can they do, what should they do, do they have, any remedies?
SB4 is commonly known as the Sanctuary Cities legislation that was passed and signed into law on May 7th. It was scheduled to go into Texas state law on September 1st. The federal judge in San Antonio Judge Orlando Garcia enjoined several aspects of it, but what he did let go into effect was what's most commonly referred to when you're talking about the bill itself is the permissibility of local police officers about inquiring into a person who is apprehended, or meaning detained or arrested, their immigration status. That went into effect September 1st, and that has not been enjoined. So currently, that is the state of the law, that locally, that local jurisdictions may not prohibit, not make, i.e. not create policies that limit police officers from inquiring as to a person's immigration status, but it does not apply to everyone, right? And that's what we'd like for our residents to know. It's not as though you're walking down the street and a police officer can say, "What is your immigration status, Liz?" That person has to be either under detention or under arrest if that inquiry is to be made. And it cannot be, and you cannot arrest somebody because you think that they might be undocumented or because you would like to inquire as to the immigration status. It has to be for an independent criminal matter that you're arresting the person or you're detaining the individual. And of course, the people that are arrested or detained have their own set of rights. So that's the main thrust of the legislation. There's other aspects of it that are getting into a lot of detail. But for now, that's being litigated, and a number of cities, including the city of Dallas, have challenged it in courts to challenge its constitutionality, and also other cities like Houston and San Antonio, El Paso, and it's at the Fifth Circuit as we speak today. So we're awaiting the litigation to move forward. And then I'm going to refer to Peter. Just kidding.
So what happens to a child's status when they are sent out, especially their passport?
I don't understand the question. Say it one more time.
Okay. What happens to a child's status when they are sent out, especially their passports? I'm assuming children that have been already deported.
I need to know more. Like, are they talking about unaccompanied minors? Are they talking about?
Yeah, that was my question.
Oh, okay. Yes, please. Thank you.
So if a child is sent out of, say, the U.S.
Uh-huh.
or which means they are U.S. citizens, so they go to a different country, what happens to those status? How?
You are a United States citizen. The child is carrying this U.S. passport, correct?
Yes.
They're a United States citizen, and whatever status they have in that particular country depends on how they entered that country. But they maintain their United States citizenship. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so they can come back.
Certainly. Yes. Definitely.
And I asked that question because I'm from Kenya. And if you're born of a Kenyan citizen, then you can apply for naturalization in Kenya, so you become a Kenyan citizen too. Then you have your citizenship in that instance. Or
Right. There's many countries that confer dual citizenship. Canada and Mexico. There's now the United States recognizes the one citizenship, right? So that's why when people naturalize, and that's sometimes a barrier, people don't want to relinquish their citizenship from their country of origin, right? But when you take the oath of citizenship, the United States becomes the country that you pledge allegiance to, and therefore, while that person might maintain a citizenship that's recognized by the other country, the United States recognizes the U.S. citizenship.
Well, Peter, we are turning to you now. And we want to talk a little bit about the business side of immigration. As you mentioned, you're working with a lot of youth in terms of entrepreneurship, and I imagine many of them come either from immigrant families or immigrants themselves. What are your thoughts on our current state of immigration as far as attracting people to come to the United States to invest and to become entrepreneurs here? Have you thought of
Well, so, yes, yes, I have. So when you think about it, for STEM-related careers, right, it's not uncommon. It's a known fact that our students here are not necessarily going into STEM-related careers. And so we have to go, you know, and find those, to fill those jobs by going outside of the borders of the United States. That's a fact. And so what we see also is that when immigrants come to the United States, their kids are also looking at those STEM careers and get into those STEM jobs, right? And so if you open up STEM opportunities, what you see when you look at all the applicants who apply, from my perspective, from my experience, I see anywhere from 70 to 80% of the students that apply are actually immigrants from the United States. I mean, immigrants from outside of the United States that actually apply to the camp. So today, I've got 27 students that's going through our entrepreneur program, and probably 80% of them are all first-generation immigrants. And so that's the trend that I've seen over the last multiple years. And so that alone tell you that we've got to figure out how to solve our current immigration system, right? You know, we talk about all the jobs that are going outside the United States, but we don't talk about all the jobs that are actually being imported in the United States that require those high-tech skills, right? I mean, we import more high-tech jobs than any other country in the world. And so we got to have the skill sets to do that. So that's what, you know, from a business perspective, that's what I've seen.
And just to follow up with that, because you are also very actively involved in the Frisco Chamber, so you probably see a lot of, you know, what's happening in terms of I mean, Frisco is considered the fastest growing city in Texas, or the world, not the world, but the country as well. So what are you seeing in terms of immigrant entrepreneurship coming into Frisco, for example?
So I'm very proud to, you know, to not only live in Frisco, but also be affiliated with the chamber itself, because we've actually started an international business committee for that purpose, right? Because we see the value of having international business. And so a couple of days ago, in fact, we had a social where our international business committee brought in the larger business community to show the value of doing business outside of the borders of the United States, and then also to have the value, to understand the value of what our immigrant community or immigrant entrepreneurs bring to the city of Frisco. If you go up the tollway, there are a lot of businesses that are investors are investing into our community that are from outside of our borders. That's helping to drive some of the commerce for our community today. So in Frisco, or you know, especially in our chamber, we're very proud of that, being able to you know, to have that level of impact from an immigrant perspective, but also from a business community perspective in our city, and taking advantage of the multiple different countries that are involved. In our school district, we have over 60 different dialects of different languages that are being spoken in our city. So, you know, so people are coming to Frisco to do business, but they're also bringing their students, their kids, and putting them into school. And so, you have to look at that and see that we cannot continue doing what we're doing. We've got to figure out a way to solve our immigration problem so that those kids have the opportunity to contribute to our community also.
And we talked about tech fields. Laura, is there any position that the George Bush Institute has with respect to maybe lower skilled workers and how we can address the needs that we have here for those types of workers as well?
Yeah, I think that there is some controversy about low-skilled immigration, and that people think that because it is lower skilled and lower paid, that maybe they don't contribute as much, or maybe they're taking jobs from Americans. And you know, we believe that if there is a need for labor, then we need to be able to meet that need, whether that's with native-born workers or whether that's with immigrants. If we don't have low-skilled immigrants and there are Americans who won't take the jobs, then we will simply find a way to do that job with technology, and we will eliminate that job because there is a cost to doing business, and there is a certain cost at which Americans won't pay for certain services and certain goods. So you have to meet the needs of the community where they are and let the market determine that. And if there is a need for low-skilled immigrants because there aren't people to fill those jobs that are here, then we should find a way to bring that labor in.
Yeah. And I think we probably agree that there really is not much of a system of doing that currently.
Right. I think probably most people would think about it in terms of the H-2A, the ag visa. That's a system that's, I think, probably inadequate for most of the farming, for most of the agriculture jobs that are out there. And then also, as you well know, the H-2B for non-agriculture, low-skilled work, there's just simply not enough of those visas to go around. It's a cumbersome process because you do have to recruit before you bring the worker in. And so you're, as a business owner, you're probably trying to go out and recruit people who aren't, you know, if you're trying to recruit a highly skilled person, the means of reaching them are different. And as we've seen with Harvey and what's going to happen in California with the fires and in Florida, we need those skills to rebuild those communities. And if we don't have people with those skills in the native-born population, we're going to have to go outside to find them.
Back to you again. So, because I think you mentioned earlier, you know, if we can get a DACA fix or a Dreamers fix, you know, that might lead the way towards more comprehensive immigration reform because, as we talked about tonight, there are many, many areas that need to be addressed. What are some of the key areas that you feel should be included in that comprehensive reform, or what's kind of the policy or proposals that you have?
You know, I think every aspect of this conversation needs to be addressed. And so what is going to happen is, as we saw in the 2013 immigration fight, Republicans don't like comprehensive reform. They like piecemeal reform. And we're going to have to address what are the places where we have the most consensus and how do we pair those up in order to start moving forward and building trust and getting this moving. So I think that and I haven't looked at the polling recently, but I think that there's pretty broad consensus on certain forms of high-skilled immigration. If you are a college student here from a foreign country and you get an advanced degree in a STEM field, should we give you a green card right away? I think there's broad consensus on that. It's very specific, but it's one area where we can start. And so it's taking the places that are least controversial, even though they're probably they probably have the least need, and finding the way forward on them first, and then working on the harder issues.
Specifically on the DACA issue, we know that around 800,000 people applied and received DACA, and we know that 124,000 of those applicants are from the state of Texas, and we know that our community has the third highest number of DACA recipients, third only to Los Angeles and New York, New Jersey. So we've seen from, I think, the DACA experience, right, that the DACA data point is really that immigration reform works. Right, that it's not going to break down our system of how we govern. It's a fix. It needs to be a permanent fix because we know that 90% of DACA recipients are working. They're creating businesses at a higher rate than native-born. That they're filling positions where we need them most, i.e. in the educational arena, where 20,000 teachers are now DACA, and if DACA goes away, what happens to the classrooms where they're teaching in? So I agree with Laura that, you know, maybe things won't happen in a comprehensive, broad brush approach, but the DACA issue is something that can be done, and it can be done, you know, before the new year.
Do we have any questions? Sure.
So somebody asked the question, could you please shed light more on the national interest waiver visa? That's one. And somebody else asked, could you please also shed light on the future of TPS? What are the legislative solutions?
Handle TPS. You want to do?
Yeah. The question was the question that Liz is going to answer.
Both questions?
The TPS question.
Oh, just into the mic. Sure.
Can you talk into the mic?
Could you please speak a bit on the future of TPS and if there are any legislative solutions for this program?
So TPS stands for Temporary Protected Status, and Temporary Protected Status, as Anne addressed in her PowerPoints, is one of those programs that's issued by the executive branch. Although it is a statutory, it is codified in statute, TPS is, but it's not meant to be, of course, by name, permanent. It's a temporary status. However, because of the system and how it works, we've not been able to find a permanent solution for those who have TPS, moving into a way where they can actually receive permanent status, i.e. green card, and move forward as a citizen. For instance, people from El Salvador have had TPS almost 20 years. They have been here for over 2 decades in TPS status, and people were thinking, well, when the comprehensive immigration reform comes, they'll be able to move into a permanent status. Well, guess what? Comprehensive immigration reform hasn't happened, as we all know, and it hasn't happened since 1986 when the IRCA, Immigration Reform Control Act of 1986, was signed into law by President Reagan. So we've been enduring a lot of changes with how the global economy works, with influx of different peoples from different countries, and our system of immigration has not moved with those changes, right? So people with TPS have been in the state of limbo, if you will, and the thought was that they would be probably able to change their status, and many have, because things change and their situations change, and some have married U.S. citizens or found other vehicles which to create permanent status for themselves. But by and large, many people haven't. For example, the Haitians program has been terminated, and in 2018, people from Haiti will be expected to depart and no longer have the protection of TPS. Although many people feel like it's very early for them to go back, to their home country given the current state of things. So as far as the statutory solution, we're going to need another immigration reform measure, right? Because TPS is already in the statute, but by definition, it's not a permanent solution to anyone remaining in the country. But TPS, there's a lot of people, just by definition, we're always second. The state of Texas has the second largest number of people with TPS, many people with TPS in the construction industries. And we know that we're over 30,000 jobs short in the construction industry in North Texas. And that'll be further hit if people are not able to remain in TPS status.
National interest waiver, okay. That was one of the questions that was asked as well. So it's an interesting question. So national interest waiver is one of the few options that allows someone to actually get a green card, permanent residence, without actually having an employer. As I mentioned before, in most cases, if you want to get legal green card status, you need to have an employer who's already ready to hire you or has hired you. In the case of national interest waiver, it's basically stating that if you and your background and your services that you're going to provide in your field will somehow benefit the United States in some way, in a objective that the United States has. So, for example, in healthcare, if you are a researcher that is producing great research that's going to help hopefully cure cancer one day, that is in the national interest of the government to want to keep you here regardless of whether or not you have an employer who's ready to hire you for that. So as you can see, it's not a visa or a green card that is really open to a lot of people. We work with them quite a bit, but most of the time it is open to any field. It's not limited to research, science, or any particular field. It had, a few years ago, been sort of open to business owners, and it was considered one of the ways that business owners could potentially get a green card without doing the EB-5 program, having to invest $500,000. They would basically show that they have created a business that has actually helped, for example, the unemployment rate, which a few years ago was a lot higher than it is now. And so one of the objectives for the national interest would be, of course, as a business owner, if you are hiring people, basically that is going to help improve the unemployment rate. That really hasn't worked out too well. The government typically has not approved many of those applications, even if you felt like you met the qualifications. But it is not it's not a fix in that sense in terms of people being able to actually get permanent status. going through the national interest waiver. It's a very niche, very small niche of people that can do that.
Yeah, somebody asked,
Okay, somebody asked, how long after one receives their travel work permit should they expect their interview date from immigration? It's a very specific question. Yes.
Wait time for that? Well, I mean, it really, well, if you're talking about the Dallas area, so generally, I'm assuming that the person is in the process probably based on a family sponsorship, for example. So right now in the Dallas area, we're seeing about from time of application to the time of interview, at least. Those numbers are changing every day, so it's really hard to predict. I mean, the government does not give us a hard and fast time frame. We kind of check every month to see where they say they are, and oftentimes when you check, they're still stuck in the same place. You know, it's not necessarily that they move forward every month, 30 days ahead. So it's really hard to say, you know, once you get your advanced parole or work permission, usually those are good for a year at a time. So you can anticipate it might take you a whole year before you get to that stage where you actually get your green card. I think that time frame is going to grow even longer now because those who are applying through employment, in the past, there was really a waiver of any interview requirement. So basically, if you were applying for the green card based on your employer sponsoring your national interest waiver, for example, you would not have to interview. You would still have to go through screening, background checks, provide your medical exams, but you would pretty much, once that's done, be approved based on the paperwork you submitted. But as of October 1st, the government has decided that everyone, nearly everyone in that situation has to go through interview. So in that case, you're going to see many more people that have to wait for that interview, and just based on the numbers, I don't know if there's been much hiring done with the Department of Homeland Security, with the Immigration Office to really try to, you know, meet that demand that's going to come in. So you may see even longer lines and timing on that.
Can a sibling with citizenship sponsor his or her adult sibling in getting residency or a form of visa? And what's the wait time for that?
Another example of how long it takes and how there needs to be a fix for that. So yes, definitely a U.S. citizen currently can apply for their sibling to get permanent residence. The timing for that depends on country of birth, country of birth of your sibling. But even so, what we're looking at then is for the time range that you're looking at is about 12 years to 20 years before that individual will be able to apply to actually get their immigrant visa if they're outside the country, or if they're illegally inside the country, to apply for a change of status or adjustment of status to the green card. So again, that is an example of the cog in our immigration system. And again, that's because of the numerical limitations. As I mentioned before, there's a limit on how many people can come in every year. And it's based on country of birth as well as the category of family relationship. Siblings are placed at the bottom rung of that, so there's typically only 10,000 allowed per year. As you can imagine, there's a lot more than 10,000 applications every year, so that's where you're seeing that bottleneck and that long waiting time.
I will say that if the person who asked that question is considering doing it, I know there's a legislative measure that eliminates that category altogether. I think it's the raise, but I'm not. Is it the raise?
It's the raise,
yeah.
yeah.
So
Yeah, and that's
FYI.
Yeah. So that's certainly a possibility. Yeah, I agree. I mean, I usually encourage people, if you feel like you're going to do it, because, you know, hopefully you'll be grandfathered in if there's any changes that happen with that as well. All right. So are there any more questions? Yeah, you go ahead.
I need a mic though.
Okay, so I'm personally going through the green card process. And I guess my question is for, like, I was once an international student. You know, you have to go through all the visa changes and things like that. From what I understand and what I'm seeing nowadays, there's really seems to be more of a push that if you do come into this country and you are an international student, it's far better for you to really get like advance your degree, like to a master's level or PhD, because you probably have a greater chance of being able to get a green card without waiting for like the whole 10, 12 years if you do it through family. Do you foresee in the near future like that shifting or that changing? And like what can like American citizens who are not in that situation or predicament, what could they do to support their international friends?
That's a great question, and Ann and I were briefly talking about that in terms of the scrutiny that's being placed on certain types of visas. I think she'd be the best person to answer that question.
I'll try. Yeah, so, well, I kind of, as I mentioned in my PowerPoint, we're seeing a lot more scrutiny on legal immigration. So there just really seems to be not only a hostility to illegal immigration, which is certainly understandable, but also to legal immigration. And it seems to be that there's a lot of questions or sort of an attitude that people who are applying for these benefits aren't necessarily legitimately applying for them. And so you are under that glass, or, you know, that microscope of, you know, what are you doing wrong kind of thing. So that's kind of what we're facing today, and so we're seeing a lot of issues with that. So that, again, really comes back to trying to push for reform in the system overall, because it is a very limiting system in terms of people who are highly qualified. Even if they meet the criteria, you're looking at still a possibility of not, you know, getting that visa. When you were mentioning, I think you were talking about the type of degree that you have.
Right.
Yeah.
A lot of lawyers will encourage, like, international students who have, like, let's say, a bachelor's degree, and they'll say that, especially before this H-1B situation
Right.
happened, a lot of them will encourage, like, you want to eventually get a green card, it's far better if you actually get your master's degree, because then you kind of skip components of the line.
Some part of that, so I understand what you're saying. So there's a couple of things I think, and maybe Peter can talk about a little bit. I think in terms of marketability, having that higher education is probably going to get you more likely to have an employer sponsor you if you're not able to do that yourself. Secondly, usually it puts you in a higher category in terms of the line that we're talking for employment. So there's about 5 or 6 lines for employment-based applications. So if you have a bachelor's degree, you're in a line that's usually a little bit longer, or because of the fact there are many more people with bachelor's degrees. But the more education you have, you're putting into the what we call the EB2 category, which means you have a master's or higher. So that is typically a faster line. Now, for some, it's still not that fast. So, for example, Indian citizens still are waiting many, many years, even in that category. So, yeah, it's pretty complex, and that's one of the reasons why we need to take a look at that.
Allies, I think that Peter mentioned the international business component of the chamber. I think being in those professional organizations where you can develop friendships and develop your network is always a positive thing, right? It may not help you in the short term, but certainly in the long run to know more people and to have people know your story is always a positive thing. When I started working on the DACA issue, I was a young attorney, and I'm not anymore. So, so you know, you have to be patient and persevering in this effort.
Yeah, just to reflect, I mean, the first DREAM Act was 2001. That's right. You know, so that's a long time, right? Yeah.
So, you know, and I think what was just said too was, I think it's important for you to not think so much about the federal government, right? Get involved at the local level. The question I would ask is, if you don't know your city council members and your mayor, those folks, because those folks in a lot of cases move on to state level positions and then national level positions. And so it's important to kind of know who they are and where their thinking are, so you can at least understand it or at least help shape some of their thoughts, right? Because a lot of people sometimes let buzzwords kind of drive their thinking, but they really don't have a good understanding of what the issue is, but what the most noise is what they kind of go with. So I'd always say, get to know them, and then hold them accountable. right? Because, you know, in reality, they work for you, so just hold them accountable. And so I make it a point to get to know every single city council member and the mayor for both, not only where I live, but also the city where our company is, so that you have an opportunity to reach out to them to kind of impact and shape some of the policy discussions that they have.
I think that a lot of the attorneys are responding to the political and policy environment. You're going to continue to see the conversation talking about how do we shift our immigration system to more skills. Because we are one of the few developed economies in the world that brings in most of our immigrants through family reunification. Canada brings in most of theirs through skills. Australia brings in most of theirs through skills. The UK, outside of what would happen with them in migration with the EU, they bring in most of theirs through skills. And so I think it's only 14% of US immigrants come in through skills. That conversation is ongoing in policy communities. How do we change that? And that will be a component of any immigration reform moving forward. At least will be a fight, even if it doesn't pass. So it's going to be a reality that more skills will make it easier.
All right. Okay. Well, go ahead.
I'm just going to say that I think sharing your stories with your community is so smart, because oftentimes people don't know what they don't know. And whether it's your city council members or your elected officials, but just businesses and your church, helping others in the community understand your story helps change perspectives. And so, you know, I know it shouldn't be that way, but it is. And so I encourage you to share your story.
And that is so true. A couple weeks ago, I was in a forum with our county judge, and whom I've spoken to multiple times, and someone mentioned that I'm a veteran, and he says, "Oh, I didn't know that." And then I said that, yeah, and I was also born in Jamaica, and wow, I didn't know that, you know. And so I still have. There are times that people ask me, "Are you sure you were born in Jamaica?" I say, "Yeah, I was." You know. You know, so I get that. So it's important for you to be able to share your story and talk to many people, right? Get outside of the circle that you're in and try to get more and more people to understand. And I think once you do that, you'll start to build advocates there, because they can help change some of the conversations when you're not there, and help to shape some of the things that's going on.
A little bit sharing, I got to say this is the right platform to mention. I came as an immigrant in 80s, and I can never forget, you know, I was very fortunate to have met with the President Reagan, you know, in the White House, and the only president who gave amnesty to the millions of immigrants at that time, you know, legal and illegal. He regularized everybody there. What I've been doing in the last 25 years is I've actually took the physicians to the smaller communities across the United States, you know, small, tiny, where there's a tremendous shortage of doctors. I must have indirectly taken the doctors to the smaller community, must have saved at least 1 million lives in this country, you know. And I do know, I worked with Anne Bagnes for a number of years, that she should take some credit for filing the immigration for those, you know, physicians there to the smaller community. But what I don't understand is such a shortage of doctors in communities. Still, they have this problem of this visa, you know, H-1B cap, and some of the people don't get selected and they go back to their country, you know. And I believe that skill-based immigration, they need to have a practical approach to solving the problem. And you train a doctor here for 4 years, 5 years, and then he's on the pool of H-1B visas, and then he's not selected, then he misses his time, and then he goes back to the country, you know. So I think that also I would like to definitely, very fortunate that this country gave an opportunity for me to be an entrepreneur. And, you know, I had my own company. I hired at least 200 employees in my company before. And I worked in Washington, D.C. I met 7 American presidents, you know. And then I'm going to be meeting with Trump also soon for this. I'm very thankful and very appreciative of the opportunity this country gave to be a proud immigrant.
That's certainly an example of also, as an immigrant, becoming involved so much in the community, you know, and we see that everywhere. You know, it's not, you know, it's not that immigrants come and they're no longer, they don't integrate. They integrate and actually become leaders in the community. So I think that's really, really key. Oh, I'm sorry, couldn't hear you.
Can you shed some light on the diversity visa, the DV visa? I think it's going to come in the conversation here, but I understand it's also threatened. And there's been a way for some immigrants to take advantage of that and this country.
Right. The diversity visa. Does anyone have kind of an opinion on that?
You know, it was, in the 2013 Senate bill, it was cut. Even though it's only 50,000 visas a year, I believe, it was cut because it was a way to find a way to move more visas towards skills-based. And so there, in the conversation about it, it really becomes, is it worth having that group of visas when we could shift that amount to people with skills? And the history behind the diversity visa is really interesting because the people who are able to come in on it now are not the people who the law was intended to bring in. And so it's an interesting historical quirk that at the time it was passed, there was a push to get more people from some of the Northern European backgrounds in because their wave of immigration had ended. And so now that's not the people coming in on it. I don't think that it's really about who's coming in so much as the skills that they have. And it'll just be interesting to see whose advocates went out on that debate because it is a fairly small number in the overall number of people we bring in every year. Yeah. It's unfortunate that that program got highlighted with the terror attack in New York because most people wouldn't have any idea what that is, and it would end up being an advocate battle in DC instead of part of the public conversation in a negative way.
And that's sort of what, as you mentioned before, is what we see is the anecdotal kinds of things that come up to negatively, you know, reflect on certain visa programs that people don't know about until we hear about that.
Yeah, I mean, how many of you know the people in your community that have a diversity visa unless you're one of them?
Right.
You know, most people aren't out there saying, hey, that's how I got in.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. All right. Well, I think we want to go ahead and let our panelists have your final word. You want to give us your thoughts? Any thoughts you might have about immigration, certainly.
Well, I'll go first since I have the mic. Just thank you so much for taking the time to listen to us. I know that you guys were a fantastic audience and very friendly, and so you feel the same way that we do about this issue and that immigrants are important. So make sure you go and spread the word and arm yourself with facts for the stubborn people and do the best that you can to build a groundswell of support.
I'm in agreement. So, and I would say don't let the things that are going on nationally stop you from being involved in your community. I think that's where you can really have a significant impact because there are a lot of policymakers that started out in the community itself in you know, small positions and then eventually made their way up to senior leadership positions in our national politics. So don't let national politics and elections be the only time that you get involved with your government. Get involved with them, you know, at the local level. And the other thing is, don't pick sides and say, this is the only way I'm going to go. If this person is this way, this is all I'm going to do, right? It's important to have discussions with as many people as you possibly can and understand that, you know, it's okay to disagree with someone's position. But it's also important for you to hold them accountable, regardless of where they fall politically. Don't let the discussion starts out by your political affiliation. In fact, I try not to talk to people who the first thing they tell me is their political affiliation because it just doesn't make sense to me. You know, it's about having a conversation. Your political affiliation that's your choice, but let's talk about how we can solve problems. And my focus is on youth, and that's where you know, where I try to hold our city officials and elected officials accountable.
So thank you, Ann, again, and thank you, New American Economy. New American Economy is actually, we've been selected at the City of Dallas for an award for the New American Economy and Welcoming America to crunch data because we think that the facts are so important and relevant and necessary to enter into these conversations. And so while we have some census numbers, it's obviously not everything we need to really crunch down and figure out, you know, what exactly do entrepreneurs need in the city of Dallas to make it and grow our economy. We're not going to be dissatisfied with state level and federal level numbers. We want to know local numbers and how we might be relevant in that space as we grow our economy further together. What I'd like to say is that my abuelita used to say, my grandmother, que no hay mal que no venga bien. There's not any bad that good doesn't come out of. And that's an old Mexican dicho saying that I think is true universally, right? That many people were disheartened when we saw that DACA was going to be terminated and is terminated, and all of these other situations where we feel like, are we really coming together? But I think that, you know, being in this space for so many years now, you see the pendulum swing back and forth, back and forth. You're ready for them to go right back into the middle again, because that's where I think that as a community, once we reach a consensus level, then we can really make some forward-thinking progress. And I'm heartened by the fact that I see that the DREAM Act has returned to where it originally was initiated in a bipartisan, hopefully nonpartisan format, and that we do have this opportunity to, at least for this one segment of our community, which is, I think, a very important segment, our young, our people who have been raised here and are a part of our thriving community and a part of all of the things that we said tonight. You know, they are doctors, they are lawyers in some states, engineers. Many of the people that I know who have DACA have 2 jobs, not 1 job, and thriving in an important part of our community. So I'm feeling hopeful that hopefully, you know, in the holiday season, Congress will have that cheer and pass it along to all of our communities. But it's not going to be done if we sit silently in our seats. That we have to definitely make a call, write a letter, talk to somebody important, like this gentleman over here knows very important people. What's your name, sir? Mr. Chari knows very important people. He can use his voice, and but together, all of us, we can make a change. I mean, I never thought as a young detention attorney for Catholic Charities that I would be senior advisor at the Department of Homeland Security. It didn't cross my mind. So I know that if we stay focused and remain committed, that we can effectuate change in our community. So thank you so much for being here. It's been very inspiring to be among you.
So let's give another hand for our panelists. Thank you so much for your wisdom and information and inspiration. And so this really, you know, hopefully for those, well, I'm sure for you to be here, you're active, you're involved. So let's continue to push forward immigration reform, starting with the dreamers, and just keep moving along. Because as you can see, we have a lot of issues to cover with immigration. And we want to make our system modern to reflect our times and to reflect the global nature of our world, you know. So thank you again for coming out. We appreciate you being here, and I look forward to talking with all of you at some point. And if you have any questions, whether they're immigration related or how to get more involved in the community, we are all here to help you with that. Before you go, we want to do a little fun stuff. We have a picture booth over there, photo booth, okay? So hopefully someone knows how to operate it. Yeah, exactly. The red carpet over there. Get your picture. We have a few props saying, you know, iMarch for immigration, iMarch for dreamers, that sort of thing. So get your picture, your memento, post it, get yourself, you know, and you're involved, so get out there. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.